Some say love is a connection between hearts. In reality, though, that connection often feels predetermined. It's like from the moment you're born, there is a role you're assigned to play in the grand spectacle of love. For women, that role tends to be of the passive receiver, of affection, of love, of lust, and sometimes of violence. We're just there on the stage, smiling, being charming, not daring to move. But there is another world, a better one perhaps. A world of fantasy where women barely exist. A world where scenes of passion play out in slow motion, where bodies are always entangled, breathless, and kind of sweaty. A world of glowing lightsabers, of mysterious empty spaces that spurt not so mysterious liquids. A play with actors so beautiful your heart nearly stops. And the best part, in this spectacle of love, you're finally just the spectator. Welcome to the fantasyland of BL, boys love, stories about love between men written mostly by straight women for other straight women. BL is the term/abbreviation currently used in Japan, boys rabu, and I'm choosing it over other more specific terms such as Yaoi, shounen-ai, danmei, etc. because I want to look at it as a global phenomenon. The same kind of fantasy, romance between men imagined by women, keeps showing up across different cultures, and I can't help but find that a little fascinating. The genre has sparked confusion and controversy because these stories, often but not always, are explicitly about sex. And the big question always seems to be, why? Why would normal straight women be obsessed with stories full of boys bonking? Well, when talking about BL and its audience, everyone seems to fixate on the bonking part. But not all of boys' love stories are explicit or erotic. In fact, they run the full emotional spectrum. They can be cute, tragic, fluffy, disturbing, hot, sometimes all at once. The phenomenon of BL is a paradox in a lot of ways, and not because it's women reading about sex. Personally, I find that giant why to be the least interesting. Why the hell not? It's twice the hot guy, so it's twice as hot. Sounds pretty simple to me. But there are other paradoxes, like how BL assigns its male characters roles that seem to mirror heterosexual power dynamics. And that's a good why question. Why take two hot guys and make them play house? Why give them gendered roles? What kind of fantasy is that, having men treat each other the way they usually treat women? Because the dynamics in BL and Yaoi in particular are often far removed from real-life gay relationships. The biggest paradox is that BL is the heterosexual fantasy of homosexuality. It's not rooted in any real-life experiences of gay men, and is even said to appropriate gay identities. Instead, it's a homoerotic narrative shaped to satisfy the fantasies of straight women. Some of these fantasies can seem really problematic. And there's a reason they're so popular. Yes, two guys might just be twice as hot, but I don't think that's all there is to it. BL is a paradox, but it's also a mirror. It reflects a deeper, ongoing crisis in heterosexuality. And to understand that, we first need to look at how women's homoerotic fantasies took shape, how they grew into a global phenomenon, and how subversive, if at all, they really are. Chapter 1. Borrowed bodies. There are many ways to tell the story of how BL came to be. I would start with Japanese girls' culture that emerged in the early 20th century around magazines meant for schoolgirls. What was peculiar about those magazines is that they serialized novels about pure, innocent yet passionate romantic love, novels for girls. Shoujo shosetsu. Pure romantic love in girls' magazines, nothing new here, you might say. The unexpected part is that it was passionate romantic love between girls. This kind of romantic love between girls was called s-kankei, or s-relationships. One of the popular novels was Otome no Minato, or Maiden's Harbor, where the concept was explained to the protagonist as S is short for sister. It is the first letter of the word. When an older student is good friends, nakayoshi, with a younger student, that's what they call it. It's a really big deal. It's a really big deal because such relationships were supposed to be exclusive. And most importantly, s-kankei wasn't just fictional, it was considered entirely normal and widely practiced among schoolgirls. who were expected to grow out of it by the time they were old enough to marry. S-kankei was a very special, passionate, romantic friendship/love between girls, a kind of spiritual love that transcends ordinary friendship, but is not sexual in nature. Supposedly, or at least, novels like Otome no Minato never use language that implies a physical relationship, but it would have been censored at the time anyways. What's important for us is that s-kankei was seen as chaste and pure, even though it often mimicked the relationships dynamics of heterosexual courtship. There was a more active, older girl and a more passive, younger one. It was also a homogender relationship in a homosocial setting based on sameness. Both girls were feminine, wore the same uniforms, shared interests in refined poetry and spoke alike. The ideal of fast relationships encouraged sameness in loving one who looks just like the self, or rather a better idealized self. The heterosexual-like power dynamics in such relationships came mainly from the difference in age and personalities. But unlike a heterosexual relationship, s-kankei was safe for girls to experience, because nothing was more dangerous for a girl than her desire for a boy. Engaging in any type of heterosexual relationship made her impure and fallen, especially since marriages were arranged without regard for her feelings. Any love she felt was likely to end in scandal. That's why in love letters to boys, girls often called themselves bad or fallen. In contrast, s-kankei love was seen as pure, chaste, because girls couldn't possibly do dirty things to each other, and safe. An acceptable space where girls could express desire without shame. Then decades passed, and shoujo culture briefly declined during the war. But after the war it came back with renewed energy, this time through manga. At first, there were stories about girls dressing as boys, but they soon evolved into tales of pure, passionate, and spiritual love between boys. Shōnen'ai, or boys' love stories, emerged as a subgenre of shoujo manga. Its earliest creators were inspired by sophisticated literature from both Japan and the West, especially the works of Hermann Hesse, tragic love stories set in Western all-boys schools, and the tanbi aesthetic, which emphasized beauty, melancholy, and refinement. The word tanbi literally means aesthetic, or fascination with beauty. This blend of influences led to the creation of iconic works like The Heart of Thomas by Fujimoto and The Song of Wind and Trees by Yaoi Kyōko, who, by the way, used to be roommates. Both stories were set in all-boys boarding schools and featured beautiful bishonen protagonists who resembled the girls from s-kankei shoujo novels' illustrations. Like those girls, the boys lived in a homogender world where everyone was the same. Their relationships weren't defined by gendered power dynamics. It wasn't biology that shaped them, but the chemistry between their personalities. The Heart of Thomas in particular reflected the spirit of shoujo culture, telling a story of pure and innocent romantic love, this time between boys who looked like girls. The Song on Wind and Trees, on the other hand, well, it opens up with all that ever satisfied me was the hot touch of skin against skin, the rapid heartbeats, the breaths filled with caresses. Not that innocent, right? It's very passionate, in fact. The story is explicitly about desire, which was previously unprecedented in shoujo manga or novels. And this exploration of sexuality and desire was possible because the protagonists were boys. Boys changed everything. Unlike girls, they were free to desire. In fact, Fujimoto actually made another version of Heart of Thomas, where all protagonists were girls. But, as she said later, the idea of two girls kissing seemed dirty, yarashi, to her. Boys, on the other hand, cannot be tainted by their desire. Gilbert from The Song of Wind and Trees narrates, "There is a devil that lives inside you, a devil that wants more than anything to be held. Even if you resist at first, you can't win over it, so you'll give your body over to the devil." For girls, desire, especially for boys, is the devil. It's the forbidden fruit. It was dangerous. If you surrendered your body to this devil, it would only lead to your destruction. In fact, as Fujimoto Yukari points out, in Japan at that time, for girls, sex was first and foremost about fear, not desire. Even if a girl possessed some mechanism leading towards desire, that impulse would be controlled by social sanctions, such as the idea that it is shameless. Set in context radically different from the reality faced by Japanese girls, foreign boys' boarding schools, boys' love manga allowed girls to borrow boys' bodies to explore desire in a way that was safe, in a way that protected the reader from its raw pain. By taking the form of shounen-ai, shoujo manga were able to enter the domain of sexuality, which had formerly been taboo. Shōnen'ai stories first appeared over 50 years ago, and since then, BL has changed a lot. But the idea that it's easier to explore certain things, like sexuality, by metaphorically borrowing boys' bodies is still relevant. And it's not just about sexuality. The BL world feels different, freer, more exciting. Whether it's the quiet elegance of boys' boarding schools or the gritty streets of New York, it's a world full of things girls are often denied. In that world, beautiful boys feel like freer versions of girls. That world seems almost like an impossible dream. In the real world, masculinity is just another kind of cage, perhaps a gilded one. But in the world of BL Fantasyland, the boys are free from rigid masculinity and gender roles altogether. In this fantasy, the idea of gender seems kind of irrelevant. The beautiful boys are androgynous. They don't just challenge gender norms, they completely break the gender binary. They blend traits like incredible strength and vulnerability, but none of these traits are tied inherently to their bodies. Rather, that's just who they are. Take number 6, for example. It's hard to say who's more masculine, Shin or Nezumi. Nezumi certainly seems more assertive at first, but as the story progresses, we see that his assertiveness and cynicism is in a lot of ways a facade. But regardless of that, both of the characters could just as easily be girls. Hell yeah to a pair of lesbians uncovering a conspiracy behind their dystopian world and saving thousands of people. I'd love to read a story like that. In any case, Shin and Nezumi seem genderless, and because they break the gender binary, their relationship also disrupts heteronormativity. Their relationship isn't about fulfilling gender roles or forming a nuclear unit. They just connect. They resonate with each other. That's it. And that's so liberating. BL's greatest potential is to offer a fantasy of relationships where no roles are predetermined. A homogender space where gender roles disappear. Ironically, this happens by removing women, but there is a sort of comfort in that. Because as long as gender difference exists, gender expectations exist, and you're either conforming or resisting, but you're always aware of them. And that's exhausting. Gender is exhausting. How sad that the most comforting fantasy is sometimes the one where you don't exist. BL worlds give us guys who don't act like guys because they're not performing masculinity. And when gender disappears, something radical becomes possible. Experiments with desire, eroticism, and power. Or as Ueno Chizuko puts it, these fantasies became a safety device that girls used to manage the dangerous weapon of sexuality by separating themselves from their own bodies. It provided wings for girls to fly. Chapter 2. Play. And fly they did, into a fantasy world where all men are secretly into each other and are neatly divided into tops and bottoms. They have flown into some wild territory, hot, fun, disturbing, sadistic, erotic, every possible fantasy, even the most sick and impossible ones. BL has got you covered. Or perhaps it is a single, maybe a slightly sadistic fantasy that poses an oddly innocent question. What if men treated other men the way they treat women? Would I like it? Would I be turned on? Would I laugh? Would I feel uneasy? Would I feel pity? Feel it more? Less, about the same? That's a whole other line of exploration. Because sometimes BL doesn't try to erase gender, sometimes it exaggerates it. It pushes gendered power dynamics to the edge of absurdity. Shoujo culture and early shonen-ai definitely shaped modern BL, but they weren't the only influences. Another major one was parody, especially through the doujinshi creators, who reimagined popular shonen stories by shipping characters who weren't originally into each other. These creators made light-hearted, erotic short pieces, just for fun. The term yaoi itself came from one of those doujinshi circles, who titled their 1979 issue Rappori Yaoi Tokushu Go, Rappori Yaoi Special Issue. Yaoi was a sarcastic acronym, Yamanashi, Ochinashi, Iminashi. No climax, no point, no meaning. There are also some less family-friendly interpretations of that acronym. Maybe I'll do a little bonus breakdown of BL terminology over on my Patreon. But in any case, Yaoi was a parody. A joke. They literally took Gundam characters and wrote smutty stories about them. Kind of like the plot? What plot? Genre of fanfiction. There is no plot, honey, just action. Then more and more original Yaoi stories appeared. Some short and funny, others more serious. Some more than just sexy stories. This playful, irreverent approach was worlds apart from early shounen-ai. It wasn't meant to be serious or to explore gender. It was meant to be fun, but that fun only became possible because the first boys' love stories had already broken the taboo around sexuality. Once that door was opened, the Jinshu culture and Yaoi stepped in to play with sexuality, and to break other things too, by making fun of them. One of the genre's most recognizable tropes is the semi-uke dynamic. The semi is the attacker, the one who initiates, well, everything, while the uke is the receiver, the one who accepts affection, among other things. This setup often mirrors heterosexual stereotypes. The semi is taller, more muscular, aggressive, and masculine, and the uke is smaller, more feminine, gentle, and nurturing. The semi pursues, the uke resists, and unfortunately, that resistance often doesn't matter because consent seems optional. Early Yaoi researchers, noticing the similarity to straight romance, happily concluded, with no evidence by the way, that female readers must identify with the uke, the more feminine character. And as I've talked about in a previous video, even readers of heterosexual romance don't always identify with the heroine. Many identify with the hero instead, because he has access to the masculine-coded traits and behaviors forbidden to women, like openly expressing anger and sexuality. This is even more true in BL. Reader reception studies show that fans often switch perspectives, identifying with both the uke and the seme. In fact, I think it's hard not to relate to the seme. I completely understand where his attraction is coming from. Cute, vulnerable guys are hot as hell, and BL is one of the few places you can consistently find them. They are the main reason to read BL, in my humble opinion. Who cares about the seme? Okay, fine, the seme can be hot too. They're both hot. That's the point. You experience them through each other's eyes and from their own perspectives. You're in their heads, but also watching from the outside. And maybe our interest doesn't always come from identifying with either character, but with the scene itself. Our attention shifts across various characters and non-character positions, each representing a distinctive role in a given fantasy. So we move between the perspectives of the same, uke, and a third position, that of the giggling demoness, as I like to call it. In Heaven's Official Blessing, there is a scene where the two characters are basically just holding hands, well, sort of. Anyway, they have an audience, and it's specifically mentioned how the demoness is watching them giggle uncontrollably for no clear reason, just because the boy's hands touched. When I read that, I immediately felt kinship with the demonesses because I too had been giggling like an idiot at that exact moment. Sometimes I'm in the characters' heads. Sometimes I'm watching them through each other's eyes, but I'm always the giggling demoness, delighted by two hot guys falling in love. This spectator position also gives readers enough distance to safely explore dark, disturbing, or outright problematic themes. And those themes have to be explored in the context of relationships, because most sexual violence happens within them. But when topics like SA, abuse, rape, or torture appear in heterosexual romance, the reader's intelligence is instantly questioned. Don't these women know abuse isn't romantic? Yes, we know, because romantic relationships aren't always romantic. Sometimes they're horror stories. Only for some reason no one assumes Saw fans want to be tortured to die gruesome deaths. But women are idiots, of course. If they're reading about abuse, it's because they don't know it's bad. Well, BL isn't heterosexual romance, technically. The characters are both men, but the horror still mirrors heterosexual dynamics almost too well. The difference is that this time, women are just spectators. Our bodies stay clearly separate from the characters' bodies. We don't have to think about being the ones used and abused and played with. Fiction already offers a safer space to explore dark themes, but in BL, the fact that the characters are male makes it even easier to distance ourselves from what's happening. On top of that, because they're both guys, they are equals. And that makes a subtle but important difference. It reveals our assumptions about SA and makes them strange, even absurd. We are usually told by both women and more loudly by men, girls, you have to be careful. Men are dangerous. Be smart. Men are wolves. Of course they will take advantage of you if you let your guard down. These assumptions turn SA into a story about the victim's lapse in judgment, not the perpetrator's crime. If all men are wolves, then why would you ever expect them to act like decent human beings when you are relaxed? But BL levels the playing field. In Color Recipe, the protagonist doesn't think twice about letting his coworker crash at his place. Why would he? It's just a simple act of human decency. Why should he have to be on guard, scanning for red flags? Then he's SA'd. The coworker, it turns out, is obsessed with him. And we don't think, well, he should have been more careful. No, clearly it's the coworker who's a sick bastard. Now, would you think the same thing if the protagonist was a girl? Or would you think that it was dumb of her to let a guy in for the night, therefore it's all her fault? When BL explores these themes, the victims aren't women. So for once, we can let go of misogyny and victim blaming. We can look directly at what terrifies us, at violence, obsession, betrayal with some degree of safety and distance. That's why, even though these are boys' love stories, they're also the perfect vessels for the horrors of heterosexuality. Every awful thing that can be done to a person and is routinely done to women has also been done to these poor fictional boys. But of course, not all BL stories are about abuse. Some simply reflect the everyday, normalized bullshit of heterosexual power dynamics. But since this is a female fantasy, it's also a retelling. Even when BL mirrors those dynamics, dark stories aside of course, the uke is never as dehumanized as women so often are and made for men. He's rarely just a passive object of desire. Even when he seems powerless, there is usually a sense that he has some kind of control over the seme, which is hardly surprising because even in heterosexual romance with, let's say, traditional gender roles, the main pleasure often lies in watching the manly man get undone by the womanly woman. Even the most obnoxious guys eventually cave in to female desire. Sometimes they even do some crawling. The same thing happens in BL. No matter how dominant the seme is, he eventually submits to the uke, sometimes forced to behave like a decent human being instead of an asshole. Yeah, I know, the bar can be pretty low. Every romantic narrative involves a negotiation of power, and in BL this instability becomes even more visible. In heterosexual romance, any hint that the heroine holds power over the hero is often dismissed. Critics correctly point out that under patriarchy, that power is just an illusion. Sure it is, but it's a hell of a fun one. BL, however, sidesteps those gendered assumptions altogether. Because both characters are men, there is no inherent gender-based hierarchy, so power dynamics get to be explored on their own terms. Nagako Buyoko analyzed nearly 400 yaoi works and found that both seme and uke roles mix masculine and feminine traits, and that power dynamics aren't inherent to the characters, but rather depend on the pairing itself. So no matter how much a semi-uke couple might appear to mimic traditional masculine-feminine gender roles, the difference between them are simply idiosyncrasies created by pairing two individuals together. Basically, anyone can be semi or uke depending on who they are with. Gender roles in this case become a game, what Nagakubo calls the amusementization of gender. This game is fun because its outcome isn't pre-decided, because power dynamics in BL aren't based on one simple standard. Sometimes factors like age or body size matter, but not always. Watanabe Yumiko argues that in BL, each character is measured according to three different scales: society, corporeality, and spirituality. These three factors combine to create a rich system of personal relationships based on subtle power balances. For example, a character with a higher status in society might be spiritually inferior to his partner, and therefore depends upon his partner in some way. Traits and vulnerabilities mix unpredictably, so mainstream expectations about power are often reversed. In fact, this kind of reversal is an incredibly common trope. BL fandom has developed many playful terms for these contradictory patterns of reversal, such as sasoi uke, mentally semi but physically uke, hetarizeme, a loser seme, jo uke, a proud uke queen, keigozeme, a semi who uses polite speech, yancha uke, a naughty uke, and gikokujo, an uke who overpowers a seme. These terms are contradictory because the supposedly more powerful character often turns out to be vulnerable. The more feminine, more beautiful character might turn out to be the one who takes the lead, or the semi might not be actually dominant. By reversing the anticipated power dynamics, these authors remind us that power, especially in sexual relationships, is often more complex than a first glance reveals. For example, My Beautiful Man features two guys. Hira is hopelessly in love with his classmate Yaoi, who sees Hira as a loser and treats him like an errand boy. Hira, meanwhile, worships Yaoi. He literally treats him like he's a god. At first, it seems like Yaoi calls all the power. He is higher up the social ladder, and Hira is totally besotted with him. But it's not that simple, because despite Yaoi's high and mighty attitude, he's really just a little boy who's afraid of being sincere. So the power in their relationships shifts in unexpected ways. It's anything but straightforward. But why focus on power at all? Well, because men seem to be obsessed with it. Power is central to the male world. Just look at stories aimed at boys. They're all about gaining power, dealing with being overpowered, or learning how to use power responsibly. These stories treat power hierarchies as natural, suggesting the bigger fish always eats the smaller one. Many, especially men, claim that's just how the world works, how it's always been, how it always will be. But what if that sacred hierarchy got tainted? For example, fighting. Fighting is a way to determine who is the strongest, right? You just have to watch for your opponent's weak spots. Well, what if your opponent's weak spot is a hidden erogenous zone on his neck? What if your enemy then offers you, quote, a fight without violence, my preferred type of fight, a battle of endurance and will? What if in the end you both win? Think of the manliest stories with action and fighting, dark thrillers, the manly world of organized crime where every man is for himself, a world without cute boys, but with manly men. And then make everyone gay. Here's a sure way to make people flip, because it's an attack on dignity. These narratives about power unfold in a male homosocial world where men compete and ally respectively, a world that, by the way, has historically excluded women. This brotherhood's dignity relies heavily on homophobia because nothing seems less respectable than a man being treated like a woman, or, God forbid, being penetrated by another man. Homophobic fantasies obsess over who penetrates whom and who holds the real power. Men remain equal only if none of them are treated like women, and only men can degrade other men by feminizing them. Well, actual gay men don't treat each other like straight men treat women. But being treated like a woman is a straight man's nightmare, because patriarchy, misogyny, homophobia are all tightly linked. And it's all absurd. So how do we deal with absurdity in fiction? One way is to imagine a world free from gender roles and heteronormativity. Another is to amplify the absurdity and make fun of it. Humor, playfulness, parody, they all work brilliantly. BL interrupts the dominant narratives of manga, television, and even choreography by giving women a chance to play with boys and the male body in ways that male authors, artists have traditionally assumed to be their right to manipulate and play with the female body. Here, the male body has been rendered posable, penetrable, and subject to disruptions that serve to queer the dominant narratives in playful and irreverent ways. So give them their nightmare, make fun of it all, let our disobedient little fantasy get under their skin. Let us play. Their bodies will be our dolls, we'll make them act out our sickest fantasies, we'll make them do to each other exactly what they imagine doing to us. Let us play. Well, the real question is, do we even have the right to? Chapter 3. Appropriation. There is a problem with parody or irony or really any kind of joking. To illustrate it, let me ask you a question. Do you think homophobia is funny? You could say, yes, of course homophobia is funny because it's dumb and makes no sense. Homophobes are idiots. Their reasoning is so flawed and they can't even notice it. We should make fun of them because they just don't know how dumb they are. We could say the same thing about misogyny, for the same exact reasons. Misogynists are just dumb idiots, and the fact that so many of them pride themselves on logic and reason makes it even funnier, because they can see the holes in their own reasoning. They're idiots. We'd be giving them too much credit if we take them seriously. But unfortunately, idiots aren't just funny, they can be dangerous. And their idiocy affects and harms real people. Then suddenly neither misogyny nor homophobia feels all that funny, because what right do we have to laugh at the suffering of others? So the answer to whether something like that is funny doesn't just depend on how absurd it is. It also depends on how traumatized we are by the thing being made fun of, how dangerous we think it is. So do we even have the right to make fun of the male world and its built-in homophobia when it's not aimed at us? What right do straight women have to play with the bodies of gay men? As you probably already know, actual queer and gay people often have, let's say, complicated feelings about straight women using their bodies to act out their own heterosexual fantasies. As one commenter puts it, the author handles her gay characters like dolls, using them to act out her desires. She shoves their rubber faces together and smudges them against one another. Now kiss. The characters who are labeled as gay are only fantasies, straight women's fantasies, shared with an audience of straight women. And they're right, in fact, as we've discussed so far, that's kind of the whole point. In the case of BL, a debate known as Yaoi Ronso erupted in the 90s, sparked by gay activist and drag queen Sato Masaki. He argued that yaoi was a form of appropriation. He correctly pointed out that it lacks the authority and authenticity of lived experience. In other words, straight women don't actually know how gay men live or form relationships. Their version of homosexuality is fantasy, and far removed from reality. But because it's so popular and widespread, it ends up shaping the cultural image of gay men, at least in Japan. Like the idea that gay men are always cute and pretty. Homosexuality is already deeply misunderstood, and fantasies like these only add to that confusion. Masaki also compared BL fans to the same creepy old men who consume exploitative porn of women. When you're spying on gay girls, take a look at yourself in the mirror. Just look at the expression on your faces. Japanese feminists pushed back, arguing that the boys in BL aren't really meant to represent actual gay men, and that the stories don't even try. Instead, BL boys are basically girls in drag, or girls in male bodies with male privilege, or straight men made to suffer the way straight men usually make women suffer. And it does make sense, especially considering how sadistic some of these stories are. They either reflect our own pain, or they make quote-unquote straight men suffer on our behalf. Only a minority of BL protagonists actually identify as gay. Most aren't really gay, they just happen to fall for this one particular guy. But doesn't it mean that gay men are kind of excluded from these stories? A lot of older BL stories were kind of homophobic, with gay characters always taking the sidelines in favor of quote-unquote straight characters. And these stories had a lot of homophobic remarks, characters saying that straight men being attracted to men is gross, as if that's common sense. Other stories, on the other hand, take place in gaytopia, in homosocial worlds where women barely exist and boys loving boys is just normal. For example, in Like the Beast, no one bats an eye at a guy dating another guy. What people find strange is that a police officer is dating a yakuza. Meanwhile, Tomoharu has only dated women, and Ake has dated both women and men. So technically they're not gay, they're bi. Some say that this ambiguity is necessary so that female readers can imagine the characters as available to them. But another way to look at it is through the lens of bisexuality studies. Here, queer theorists have long challenged not just the binary of male and female, but also the binary of heterosexual and homosexual. These rigid categories leave little room for the spectrum of genders and sexualities in between. BL, however, opens the door to a different kind of thinking. It lets us imagine a sexuality not tied to fixed identity, or even to physical bodies. A bi girl once told me, "You fall in love with a person, not their gender." At the time, that felt like a radical idea to me, but many BL fans find this deeply romantic and freeing, that the characters love each other for who they are, not what they are. Of course, I understand that sexuality doesn't work this way for everyone, but personally, I find this idea fascinating, which is why I love romance stories that feature cross-dressing or gender flipping. The second part of Sato Masaki's argument is also worth exploring. Are we, girls who consume BL, really just like dirty old men objectifying women? Well, On the one hand, BL does present male bodies for the female gaze, and sometimes in pretty objectifying ways. But there is a key difference. The objectification of female bodies is grounded in reality. Women are actually treated like objects in the real world. Our bodies are constantly watched, policed, sold, and trafficked, often by the same men who objectify us. The issue isn't just the male gaze, it's the male actions that stem from it. It's not just annoying or creepy, it's dangerous. But nobody in real life treats male bodies, even gay male bodies, as objects that exist solely for women's fantasies. Women don't treat men like that, not even in our fantasies. BL is a reversal, an imaginary world where men are as objectified as women. But even in BL, we need a man to objectify another man for us. This alone says a lot about the limits and the power of the female gaze. We have trouble even fantasizing about treating men like objects, gay or not. On the other hand, we can also look at objectification as a kind of misrepresentation. Real-world harm aside, hypersexualized girls in some video games just look weird. That's not me, that's not even a person, that's a weird, comical, cartoonish, sexy stereotype. A fantasy with no grounding in reality, just like, the boys of BL can be sometimes. Of course, they feel alienating to gay men. They are fantasy constructs. Actual gay couples don't behave like heterosexual couples. That sounds like a stereotype, because homophobes like to imagine that to be a gay man is to be feminine, or to be treated like a woman by another man. But of course, that's only a harmful, degrading stereotype if you believe that women are lesser human beings. Gay men get caught in the crossfire of misogyny, not because they are women, but because they are compared to women. And make no mistake, it's the misogyny that's doing the damage. Personally, I don't think that being like a girl is an insult, because I am a girl. In fact, I think more men, straight or queer, should be a little more feminine. First, because femininity isn't a weakness. And second, because everyone deserves to escape the tiny, suffocating box of gender roles. It's liberating, try it. That said, BL stories often parody the absurdities of heterosexuality, and those absurdities might feel deeply disturbing to men, gay or straight, because men aren't used to being treated like that. We are. And it should feel disturbing. That's the point. You are finally getting a glimpse of what it's like. With BL, we don't have to think about being the ones used and abused and played with, but you guys do. But it is kind of unfair though. Straight women need this fantasy to make sense of heterosexual nonsense, but on the other hand, the same exact fantasy so often alienates the people it sort of represents. And if we say it's not about gay men, then why not? Isn't it strange that stories about love between men don't center gay men? Why should they be the dolls in our trauma processing stories? Queer men don't exist to fix heterosexuality, and we shouldn't expect them to. As Ishida Hitoshi argues, both representational appropriation and self-projection, autonomy of desire, are indispensable elements of yaoi/BL. The two are mutually constitutive in the genre. So yeah, I do understand why queer men might feel annoyed or even insulted by BL, saying, "Girlies, can you please stop bringing your heterosexual bullshit into our love? You can't even imagine a truly egalitarian relationship, can you?" And yeah, we can't. We're trying, that's kind of the whole point. We'd love to, but we have this huge steaming pile of patriarchal bullshit in our hands, and no idea what to do with it, where to put it. We've spent our whole lives being told that this is what love looks like. Find a nice man to dominate you, a good man to take care of you, because obviously you can't possibly take care of yourself. Don't you think it's weird that Prince Charming is always older, wiser, richer, and just generally better than you? That model of love is broken. It's rotten to the core, because no man, no matter how nice, will ever be good enough to justify having complete control over you. Default heterosexuality is broken, and thanks to feminism, we're finally starting to see just how broken it really is. So, how do we fix heteropatriarchy? Well, I think a lot of it starts with imagination. If we can imagine a different kind of love, maybe we can one day live it. So that's what we're doing, turning the old script around in our hands, trying to figure out what happens if we tweak this or that. What happens if we disappear from the picture? What if we just sit back and watch the spectacle? Is it more bearable? Funnier? Maybe, but one thing is clear, we don't want to be in it. It's too uncomfortable, so we've made fictional boys take our place. Sorry boys, you're taking the fall. That being said, heteropatriarchy doesn't just affect straight women, it affects everyone, and it's not going to dismantle itself. Like it or not, we're all in this together, and we can only begin to fix it if we actually listen to one another. Which is why straight women also can't just say, sorry boys, this is our fantasy, it's not about gay men. Can you please stay out of it, thanks? That's weird and wrong. Ideally, this should be everyone's fantasy, because in the real world, we don't get separate dreams. We only get one world and we all have to share it. My first point still stands. The real power of BL, or honestly any queer romance, is that it offers a space where roles aren't predetermined, where love really is just a connection between hearts, not some rigid arrangement between genders. A lot of boys' love stories imagine a world where gender doesn't dictate desire, where people can just love who they love. Yes, women might be misinformed about the realities of gay life, but that doesn't mean we're incapable of telling meaningful stories. Stories that can make a real-world difference. Sure, not all of BL sincerely engages with the complexity of queer identities, but some of it really does try. And in a lot of places where queer voices are silenced, women writing gay romance become voices for those who can't speak, and they face real danger for doing it. In many countries, boys' love isn't just stigmatized, it's criminalized. Chinese danmei authors face real legal consequences. The two women who wrote the Russian gay love story Pioneer Summer, an instant indie bestseller, are now being prosecuted under anti-LGBTQ+ propaganda laws. And here's a not-so-secret secret. In Russia, BL manga and webtoons are often just as popular as shonen, sometimes even more so, on underground fan sites, of course. In countries where queer people can't speak openly, BL fills the silence. Maybe it's not perfect, maybe it's not enough, but it's something. And it's a start. There are other things too. BL is one of the few genres that routinely addresses the sexual assault of man, and not just addresses it, but it treats it with the seriousness it deserves. And it's able to do that because its characters aren't trapped in rigid masculinity. They are allowed to feel emotions, to cry, to admit they're hurt and devastated. That's one of the reasons some straight men read BL, because it offers a version of masculinity that isn't suffocating. BL normalizes male vulnerability, and I think that's something we're all starved for. Women too. First of all, we're starved for guys who are cute, and we're sick of always being the ones who get dominated. At one point, I even considered saying that maybe we wouldn't need BL anymore if quote-unquote femdom became more mainstream. I put femdom in air quotes because for some reason, for women, any kind of sexual behavior that isn't passive is immediately labeled as kink. I've got nothing against kinks, but not wanting to be passive shouldn't automatically count as one. And of course, heterosexual romance is slowly changing. More and more stories are popping up where girls take the lead. But decades ago, BL was the only place where you could even imagine yourself being the one to make the first move. It's true, BL can be a little weird and far from reality, but it's this weird for a reason. We're sick of the old love script, and we still haven't come up with a new one. The one where gender is irrelevant. So here's to us trying. Thank you for listening.